Welcome everyone. Thank you so much and good evening. It's a real pleasure. Hello? All right. Thank you everyone and welcome to today's program. We're really happy to have you all here and our esteemed panelists for this educational program on leadership and innovation, sustainable growth. This is going to be the topic that we're going to be discussing today. I'd like to introduce our panelists, starting on my left here with Marina Pravdik, who's Director of Operations Policy and Advocacy at the Rockefeller Foundation. So Marina manages the budget, grant making and contracting for the foundation's communications, and we'll hear a lot more during the discussion. We also have Amanda Ellis, Executive Director, Asia Pacific for the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation. Amanda is also Senior Director, Global Partnerships and Networks for the Julian Wrigley Global Futures Laboratory at Arizona State University. We have with us Hank Rogers, President of the Tetris Company and a pioneer in the video game company, in the video game industry, sorry. He's also the founder of Blue Planet Alliance with a focus on island communities disproportionately affected by climate change transition. George Svikos,
yeah,
did I get that correct?
Huh?
Great, thank you. Executive Director of Communications Global Markets at General Motors. So George leads a team of communications professionals all over the world, focusing on corporate, product, and internal communications. And last but not the least, we have with us here Eda Aradutir, did I get that correct? Awesome. CEO at CarbFix, a company providing a natural and permanent storage solution by turning CO2 into stone underground. Very, very exciting concept that we'll dive more into during the discussion. So Amanda, Marina, Hank, George, and Eda, welcome. Thank you again for making the time to join us. Really looking forward to your valuable insights and contributions. And we'll love to have the audience contribute. If you have questions, there'll be an opportunity for you to chime in as well to make this a very lively and engaging discussion. We'll dive right in. I'll start with you, Marina. You've had extensive experience in the philanthropy space. One of the portfolios you've managed was a $2 million grant for COVID vaccines and tests during the pandemic. With that in mind, how has that experience, influenced, when you take that role, how does philanthropy play in fostering innovation, sustainable innovation?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, first of all. And I would like to just say thank you to all my esteemed panelists and a special recognition for Amanda and Eda because they just finished this amazing program that they lead called We Empower, which is about giving awards to female entrepreneurs from across the world. And they just had their award ceremony last week. And Eda was one of the awardees of this year, so it's really an honor to be with you guys. And so I'm so happy that we at the Rockefeller Foundation had a small contribution to make into that program. So thank you. And thank you so much to the organizers, of course, to the Association of Foreign Press Correspondents here in the United States, to Thanos, to Alan, to Nancy, and everybody else on the team for having me tonight and for doing this wonderful event and providing these wonderful educational opportunities for the foreign correspondents here in the States. So I represent the Rockefeller Foundation, as we said. It's an old institution, 111 years old. It was founded by John D. Rockefeller, who was also the founder of Standard Oil. So last year, we had some deep introspective moments and decided to actually align all our programmatic and operational investments along climate change, which seems maybe slightly controversial considering what our founder is, but thank you. We all at the foundation were very, very excited about this just because we know that climate change is the existential crisis of our time. And we know that it is a very, very uphill battle that we are facing, that it's a long-term and projected kind of issue and a thorny issue that we have to deal with. But we also see it as an opportunity for all of us as humanity to really rethink, reform, and transform our systems. And so for us, the ones that we look at are food, health, energy, and then innovative finance. And so it's really to kind of rethink how we can address these long-standing inequities that climate change is exacerbating across the world, and especially in the global south, in those places that are most vulnerable to climate change. So to go back to your question about the pandemic, we all had different lessons that we learned during the pandemic. It was such a monumental phase and event in all of our lives, and really for all of humanity. One thing that I always reflect on is if we were able to, in a relatively short amount of time, get to these kinds of technological advancements that got us to developing the COVID-19 tests and vaccines, we should probably be able to do that for climate change as well. It's just that people don't see that urgency yet. But so if we had Operation Warp Speed here in the States for vaccines, maybe we could think about that as well for climate change. Yes. So I think that's one sort of on a larger scale observation. The other one, from my point of view, at the time I worked a lot on how to change public perceptions about the benefits of COVID vaccines and COVID testing. And one way we did it is we actually went to the local leaders in communities, and we talked to those trusted messengers, and those were religious leaders in some instances, they were community leaders, they were artists and actors and other sort of icons in those communities that people really look to for counsel or for inspiration. In some cases it was also doctors, pediatricians, it was primary care doctors, people that people really trust. And I think trust with a capital T, right? They really think, they know and believe in what they say. And so we were able to kind of enable them and empower them with the right messages about how to do this for vaccines and for testing effectively. So I think we're trying to draw those lessons also for climate change, and we're realizing that actually that is the way to do it as well. Go local, and go to those communities that are not convinced, and go through these trusted messengers, because often that's how you get to them. So I think that's sort of the one recipe for success, especially when it comes to really changing public perception, and so that you go from bottom to the top, right? So then the next level is then to go to policy levers and to the policy makers afterwards. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. And since you touched on communication, I'd like George to come in here with your work at General Motors, engaging global stakeholders. What role does communication play in this cause, really driving the climate agenda?
Well, first I want to thank you for having me come straight after Marina, who did all the acknowledgements so perfectly and such a polished way to Stacey. But thank you to the association. We've had a long partnership. I mistakenly said 4 years, so Thanos has locked me in for funding for next year as well. It's been 3 years, but it's been very productive. I think on the communication side, when you're working for a company that's put some big goals out there, and I mean, we're a 100-plus-year-old company, we're an industrial company, and people have perceptions of what that company does. We've set the objective of 0 tailpipe emissions from our light-duty fleet by 2035. We're growing our EV sales and portfolio. We're going to produce somewhere between 200 and 250,000 EVs this year and sell in the US, let alone what our operations are doing in China. We're growing EV sales at about 17% month on month compared to last year. So it's increasingly becoming a major part of our business. What's our role in communications? I think it's to demystify the transition as much as possible. There's as anyone in this room would know, you pick a topic, there's a ton of misinformation out there about whatever that topic might be. But you put someone behind the wheel of an EV, and it's just so much better. Like they're amazing to drive.
Yes.
I've got to confess, I'm a total car guy. So if there's any car people in the room, and show me up for my knowledge. But when I sit in it, it's quiet. I can talk to my family while I'm on a highway. It's connected, so I can access everything that's on my phone. I can access in my car. the charging, to be honest, like we've got, not just us, the industry's got vehicles that are 300, 400, 500 mile range. Right? The charging thing, unless you're driving from coast to coast, you can home charge your way to freedom very easily. And so I think number one is myth busting. Number two, familiarisation, getting people behind the wheel. Three is participating in forums like this. Right? Conversations matter. What people say matters. And it's not, I mean, a bit of what comes out of my mouth, but it's also what comes out of everyone else's mouth, because then we take that back into the company. We're like, well, you know, we've got this aspiration, maybe 70% of the room's with us, 30% isn't. What do we do about that? How do we synthesize? So I think communications function plays a really important role in bringing the outside into the company as well. So I think they're the main things that we encounter.
Amanda, building on that theme of EVs and innovation, given your work at the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation, how do you think global partnerships, what role do they play in driving the climate changes and the climate agenda in general?
What a fabulous question. I think that partnerships are absolutely key. And when I look around this room and see the diversity that's here, say no more. But the Global Institute of Sustainability was founded over 20 years ago by Julie Wrigley, who was way ahead of her time, before the UN SDGs that I was privileged to help negotiate in 2015. And really, she came up with something new just a couple of years ago and said, look, we know that sustainability is no longer enough. We really do need regenerative global futures. So the work that's being done with EVs and zero emission vehicles, and I'm a huge champion of EVs.
Yes.
Oh.
I should say, sorry,
Yeah.
this is not just a Southern Hemisphere mafia week
Yeah,
together,
no.
right?
I live in Hawaii, so
Yeah.
we're totally off grid thanks to that. And when you think about the dual purpose use, given that storms are becoming so much more frequent and so much more intense, it's a really important strategy for resilience for islands. If you can reverse charge your EV and use it to power after crisis, it's so sensible. So this is the next generation. So Julie founded the Global Futures Lab with the idea of just and regenerative global futures, grounded in indigenous wisdoms and high tech, deliberately multi-stakeholder and transdisciplinary. So that's very much our philosophy. And I look around the room, I see our partnership with UN Women. We've already talked about Rockefeller. Hank's going to talk about the Blue Planet Alliance, which is a wonderful partner. I see John from Deloitte. I see Thomas sitting here. And then, just thinking about how much more we can get done together with a multiplier effect. We look at it on three levels. First of all is the micro level, relationships and partnerships, and then the meso level. How is it that you work through organizations like corporates that may have similarly aligned goals? And then finally on the macro level, we really do need policy levers. So we have three big global partnerships, one with the Interparliamentary Union, 180 member countries, second with the Commonwealth Parliamentarians, 56 countries, but 175 jurisdictions overall, including subnational, and then with the IMF and World Bank parliamentarians. And we work with that group deliberately on climate action tools, crowdsourcing from all our brilliant academic and corporate partners, tools like emissions, how do you figure out your climate laws, etc., to help parliamentarians on the policy journey that they need to go on. Sorry, I could talk forever.
Oh, that was great, thank you. And you mentioned island communities. Hank, your work at the Blue Planet Alliance involves transitioning these communities from fossil fuel to 100% renewable energy. In your view, what leadership strategies have proven most effective in driving this transformation?
So in order to get the leaders on board and the parliamentarians on board, we had to get the people on board. In order to get the people on board, we got the children on board. So the first thing we did was had elementary school children exchange 300,000 light bulbs, LED for incandescent, explaining to an adult that this is going to save them money and it's going to save the climate for the future. This culminated in us having a mandate, Hawaii being the first state in the country to have a mandate for 100% renewable energy. Since then, 13 other states have copied our legislation, including California, Illinois, and New York. And today we are doing what we did in Hawaii. We're helping islands and island countries do what we did, because even if we're completely successful in the US, we're only 4.2% of the people in the world. And in order for us to solve climate change, we have to change the entire world. So far we've brought 18 islands to Hawaii. We have another cohort of 10 coming next week, actually. And what we do is we bring someone from the government, someone from the utility, someone from the regulatory agency, and someone from the community. And if there's no woman in that group, then they have to pay their own way. But if there's a woman in the group, then no. So Amanda is on our board. She makes the real rules. My board is always going to be a majority of women, and I know that's probably illegal, but I'm doing it anyway because men got us into this, and I have absolutely no confidence that us men can get us out. I am not the president of the Tetris company. That would be my daughter. I got out of the way. She runs the company much better than I ever did.
Thanks for the question. I would like to get some thoughts from Eda as well, and great work, by the way. Love the women angle there, very important. Eda, your work at CarbFix, really groundbreaking into this carbon capture. Talk to us a bit more about how that process works and what potential it has for large-scale solutions.
Absolutely, thank you for the question, and it's wonderful to be with all of you here today. It's been busy last few days, but a wonderful last few days. And when it comes to my company, I lead an Icelandic-based climate tech company called CarbFix. And what we do is that we capture and receive CO2, inject it underground by dissolving it in water while we inject it. Basically, what we inject is sparkling water. And then when this sparkling water enters the favorable geologic formations that we target, it turns to stone. So the dissolved CO2 in the water turns into stone in just 2 years. And I have even got the proof here in my pocket. I always carry rocks with me. So here you have an example of calcium carbonate. This is calcium that comes from the bedrock and CO2. And it's locked away forever. And this is actually nature's process of permanently storing carbon. Most of us are not aware that over 99.9% of all carbon on Earth is already stored in the form of minerals in the rocks beneath our feet. This is nature's way of regulating carbon through the global carbon cycle. But we have, through our human activities, disturbed the natural balance of carbon within this global carbon cycle. So what we do is that we tap into this technology and process that nature has already perfected, but by introducing our technology into the process, we allow the mineralization to happen in 2 years instead of it happening over geologic timescales. So that is the technology in essence. We have been developing it since 2006. And in just 7 years, we transformed what was an idea on paper then into a proven industrial scale climate operation. And since then, over the past 12 years, we have been increasing our scale. We have over 10 years operational experience in Iceland in permanently mineralizing both CO2 from energy production, geothermal energy production, but also by working with companies that actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And our technology supports then both emission reductions as well as carbon dioxide removal. It's sort of the underlying infrastructure for both. We are working on scaling our technology. One of the beauties of this technology is that it doesn't just work in Iceland. It works more or less everywhere around the planet, because these geologic formations that we target, that mineralize CO2, they are some of the most abundant rock types on Earth, and they can store orders of magnitude than ever needed for climate action. And let's remember that already over 99.9% of all carbon is stored through this mechanism. So we have an expansion pipeline that we want to implement across the world, of course, as quickly as possible. Climate desperately needs it, but there are some barriers in the way. It's a new technology. Policy isn't necessarily the fastest to catch up with new technologies, but at the same time, carbon capture and storage is heavily regulated, both in Europe and the US. So we're sort of picked into a policy framework that's written for something else, and that's not optimal. And then of course it's funding and so forth. So there are definitely a number of barriers that we are working our ways through, but the potential is huge, both when we look at emission reduction as well as carbon dioxide removal. And of course, all reports, they tell us that carbon capture and storage is one of the critical technologies that we have to bring to scale in the coming decades, together, of course, with so many other solutions. I'm not saying this is the magic fix to all things climate, definitely not, but it has to be part of the solution. So we target the hard-to-abate sectors like cement production, steel production, chemicals production that can't abate their emissions through energy transition, because the emissions come from the production process itself, and then also through carbon dioxide removal, which will have to be brought to scale by mid-century. I think I'll leave it at that for the time being. I can also, like Amanda, talk all day.
Thank you, and that's a great segue. I wanted us to look at some of the different barriers and challenges, across sectors, and I'll come to you, Amanda, in your work at the We Empower UN SDG Challenge, which aims at promoting inclusive entrepreneurship. How important is that, especially for marginalized groups like women, and especially the challenges in that space?
I'm so excited, I'm grabbing the microphone. So absolutely critical. As of this year, 2024, let's do a little quiz. What percentage of rights do you think that women have compared to our male counterparts globally? In terms of economics, do you think it's 100%? Do you think it's 90%?
40%?
So we have 2/3 of the rights of our male counterparts, and it's gone backwards from 70% a couple of years ago. So you can see that already there's a huge disconnect, and thank you for the work that's being done by UN Women around the world on this. And what we have found through the We Empower UN SDG Challenge is that, in fact, despite the odds, women are coming up with incredible, innovative solutions. And if you just go to just Google We Empower UN SDG Challenge, and you will see many of the incredible stories of inclusive entrepreneurship. So there is a very important link between gender equality and economic empowerment that really more people need to make. And that's part of the reason that we're working with parliamentarians. So the other key issue that I'd love to highlight is the perversity of policy. So in the US, did you know that everyone is paying $2,500 of your taxes to the oil companies? And globally, there's $7 trillion of subsidies to fossil fuels, according to the IMF. And the IMF similarly has estimated that were we to remove those subsidies and repurpose them, we would have a drop in emissions of 34% by 2030. And we need to get to somewhere close to 45%. So when we think about it in that regard, policy really matters. Incentives really matter. And legislation really matters.
Marina, here.
Yeah, no, first of all, would love to just underscore Amanda's point about gender equality. I think, yes, for economic development, but also for climate change, right? For climate action. We know that women are often, women and children are the most vulnerable to climate change across the world, and especially in those underserved communities in the global south that are the most vulnerable, like island nations and others. We also know that often they are the ones who are bringing the income in many cases as well. So we work very, we our sort of greatest investments probably in the last, let's say 10 years has been around renewable energy. And one of the reasons is because we see, well, first of all, to your points about stats, 700 million people are still in the dark, figuratively and literally. So they do not have any access to electricity. 600 million of those 700 million are in Africa. So, and many, that is pervasive across sectors, right? So that means that people can't work, they can't, have their livelihoods. That means that children can't go to school because they can't have the light on. That means that people don't have any kind of cooling in very, very hot and more hot, much hotter kind of environments that they have to live in. And ultimately, they can't go to hospitals, right? There cannot be really basic healthcare services that are provided to people in these places. So that is one way that we're also thinking about how to uplift a lot of a lot of the planet's most vulnerable people. It's through really access to allowing and enabling access to reliable and renewable energy and power. So one way that we're doing that right now is through a program called Mission 300 Accelerator, which is actually, to your point about, or Amanda's and everybody's points about partnership. It's a large-scale partnership with the World Bank and the African Development Bank and many other implementers, and it's about electrifying 300 million Africans by 2030. So it's a really, it's an ambitious effort, but an aspirational one, but one that we see with having great potential to actually improving the human condition in Africa.
I'd like to bring Henk in as we talk about renewable energy.
He's been out too
I
much.
can imagine. It's been a busy week. Thanks again for being here. I really appreciate your time. On renewable energy, how do you see that field evolving when it comes to continuing to build solutions to tackle climate challenges?
So, yeah, first of all, we have to have coffee so that we can stay awake.
Yeah.
So, the way I perceive the world is that we have the technology, we have the money, all we're lacking is the willpower. And our experience in Hawaii is we went from it's impossible, there's no way we can do this. We make electricity by burning $2 billion a year of oil and $1 billion of coal. That's how we do it. And then finally when we twisted their arm and said, no, actually, that is not how you're doing it, because in 2045 we're going to turn it all off. And then they started thinking about it, and then they came to realize, hey, you know what, we can actually do this. And they realized that they could make, we changed their business model so they could make more money by switching to renewables. They went from being our worst enemy to our best friend, and today we're at 36% renewable energy in Hawaii.
From 5% base just 7 years ago.
So, I mean, it's just a decision. And so all of this talk about how to do this and where's the money coming from and so on, that's all it's irrelevant. The real thing that we have to be talking about is the decision to go 100% renewable energy. The decision is, when are we going to fix climate change? If we don't have a deadline, it's never going to happen. This building that we're in, somebody said, I need a building, and if the answer from the engineers or the construction said, well, it'll be done someday, this building would never have been built. And so they up there cannot make the decision for us, then we will have to make the decision. And I think the decision is very simple. We want climate change fixed by 2045. That's the 100th anniversary of the United Nations. It's very simple. It's just a decision. It's just a decision. People ask me if I have hope, and I say no. I do not have hope. I have determination. This is it. This is it. 100% by 2045.
It's doable. hopefully.
It's more than doable. We are doing this. There's not a question. This is not like maybe we're going to do this. We are absolutely doing this. And the more people that think that, the quicker it will happen. But it will happen. It's just a question of how much damage are we going to allow to happen before we fix it.
Amanda wanted to.
Yeah, I want to tell my story of how when I first met Hank and he told me about this, I was like, really, what's the point of doing this with only 1.4 million people? He said, Amanda, this is demonstration effect. And a couple of years later, we were both at then Governor Brown of California's Global Climate Action Summit. And he announced on stage that California was following Hawaii's lead and committing to 100% renewable energy. And Hank was very sweet and didn't say, I told you so. He just said, now do you get it? And I went, yes, I'm all in. And what he didn't mention is that while 13 other states have followed suit, over 50% of Americans are now covered by a mandate for 100% renewable energy. Iceland is already 100% renewable. New Zealand, where I'm from, is at 90%. So, love this. We have determination, not just hope.
Thank you. I think that I want to come to George from that communication perspective. You are responsible for, sharing GM strategy across various international markets. What are some of the challenges you've encountered in this effort, and how do you ensure that that message resonates effectively across various audiences?
Yeah, well, I think the first one is, I think what the other panelists have shared is, I think too often this becomes a binary debate and a binary discussion. And for us, really, sustainability is good business for us. And when you can explain that in a way that makes sense to people, and you take a lot of the noise out of the discussion, I think that is a real task for us in communications. And it's a real task for any company, whether they're using a PR person like me or they're not. That's their challenge, is how do you make that credible? How do you make it believable and attainable? And how do you strip the noise out of it? I mean, our CEO said just the other week, that we never expected propulsion systems to become contentious, right? Because it's technology. And so I think what we can do is a little bit of the demonstrating that you can do things like, for instance, we're going to be 100% renewable on all of our facilities in the US by 2025, and we're so close. Yeah, on our facilities, on our factories, we've purchased enough energy, we've brought in enough change into our energy mix to be 100% renewable by 2025. Which is a great thing, and what I think we can do is to amplify that in as many forms as we can, because we have buying power. Like we can shape decisions that other companies make through the supply chain, through our own supply chain, not just energy, but in ethical practices, in what they source. You have a look at what's happened with salt and sea as well, and the change in practices there, driven a lot by players like us working with our suppliers to find better, more sustainable ways of doing business. So I think amplification's number one. I think number two is not making it a binary debate. So we often say what we do at the moment is we offer choice. If people are comfortable right now switching to an EV, and we'd really like to convince them to switch to one of ours, we have that for you. We also know that when you look globally, the countries, they're at different stages of their development. So this transition is going to happen at different paces around the world. So we need to keep running a dual offering out there. We also need to sell the value of increasingly efficient internal combustion engines too. I know it's not the message that everyone may want to hear in this room, but they're better than they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago. So we've got to keep investing in those to make them better, because the reality is large chunks of the world, that's what they can access under the current settings. And we need to keep investing to make our EVs better, with longer range, cheaper, sustainably built as well, and then working on things like end-of-life batteries and all the other challenges that will come with that again. So I think the third task and why I brought up some of those issues is to say we need to be active participants in public discussion, even ones that are uncomfortable for us.
Thank you. I'd like to bring Edda in. Edda, you mentioned earlier some of the barriers and challenges you've encountered. Can you delve a bit more into that and how you're overcoming them to ensure that this works, like you said, not just in Iceland, but across markets?
Yeah, I think we've spent most effort on policy because that is what really unlocks the potential of all climate solutions. And it's difficult, you know, depending on which jurisdiction you're in. You're dealing with a completely framework, different, you know, permits that you need, and you go about the permitting licensing process is just in a totally different manner for exactly the same project, which is somewhat crazy, but it is what it is. So we have not spent effort, you know, fighting that. That's just how it is. But we are pushing and have been for a number of years, the European Commission, for example, to adjust their policy framework so that it better encompasses technology like ours. Trying to do the same in the US. The way regulation here in the US is that it has been decided that to inject carbon, irrespectively of how you do it, what technology you use, whether it mineralizes or not, you have to use the same well design, which is way overspec for our technology. So what does that mean? You end up with a much more expensive project with no added benefits. And it takes forever to change these policies. So I really like to see sort of more speed in adjusting the frameworks that not just us but other climate technologies have to go through. I read somewhere not so long ago that because of inefficient regulatory frameworks and processes, wind, for example, is only at 66% where it could be if these were sort of more efficient, up to speed. Not saying we shouldn't have these frameworks. Obviously, we have to have them. We have to make sure that projects are built in a responsible manner, but they are not at matching the level of urgency at which we have to act. For me, it's insane that it's easier to get the license to put a new oil well online than it is to get a well online to actually inject carbon. It should at least be the same, but it's not. It's not. So that's one. So anybody wanting to join the policy wagon, we're happy to have more on board. But this will truly have an impact if we can increase efficiency there. And then, of course, when it comes to funding climate projects, the last couple of years have, of course, been challenging, just globally in the financial markets. So it is important that we see a change there. And Amanda mentioned the 7 trillion that's going into fossil fuel subsidies. Only diverting, a portion of that to climate action would really speed things up. So those are just a few of the ones that we're dealing with, but we are determined, yes. And we are making it happen, even if at a slower pace than we could.
Determination is the key word here. And Amanda, you were previously New Zealand ambassador to the UN. Any diplomatic strategies in tackling some of these issues?
A big one is education and awareness raising, which is why we're so grateful to you for your brilliant moderation, and Thanos. I'm going to make a confession. In 2015, when we were negotiating the SDGs, I, along with probably at least 90% of my colleagues, said, climate's probably 150 years off, somebody will figure it out. We really did not understand the gravity of the situation. And for those of us who are bureaucrats as opposed to scientists or doers, there's a big role still to be played with education, and that's part of the reason why I've now partnered with these 3 big global groups of parliamentarians to help bridge the gap between the scientists who really have been talking about this for the last 40, 50 years. In fact, it was a woman called Eunice Newton Foote, the first scientist to to make the connection between increased CO2 in the atmosphere and increased global warming. Any guess what the date was?
1974.
18 something.
1856.
Really?
So we have known since 1856. Now the fact that this $4 billion spent on disinformation in the US alone may have something to do with this, but the scientists have known for a long time, and it's up to us now to make this information broadly accessible and understandable. So we're so thrilled to be partnering with everybody on the panel and with the foreign press correspondents to get the word out.
Oh, I just wanted to piggyback again on what you just said. Surprise, surprise.
Great partnership.
Yeah, exactly. We know that the public perceptions about climate change vary vastly across the globe. And yet, even in places where people are aware of climate change, they still don't really understand what to do about it, or they feel hopeless. So I'm, very optimistic, actually, especially after hearing all of you speak, because there are so many solutions that we just need to really invest time and energy and money in. But my other point was going to be, you have to sort of look at different levers in society, right? You definitely have the policy lever, obviously one that we all spoke about, which is a very important one. There's the business lever as well. And I loved your line, sustainability is our business. That's great. I mean, that is how we should all be thinking about it, truly.
It's good for business.
Exactly. It's good for business. It's good for all of us in all ways, right? But I think, there needs to be also a culture shift. And I think you all, the foreign correspondents and representatives of the media in this room, really can help us with that. We just saw over the last couple of days, in the most developed nation in this world, what Hurricane Helene did to communities in North Carolina, in Florida, in Georgia, other places. People were displaced, towns were wiped out. And this is, again, in the United States of America that supposedly has resources to deal with this. So we're seeing more and more, as you said, these storms are going to be more frequent, more powerful, and we need people to connect the dots and say that the cause is climate change, or at least that they're immensely exacerbated by climate change. We know in this case that it was because of the warming of the ocean. It's clear, night and day. So I think we all need to do better as well to, like you said, say it in an understandable way, so that people understand, wow, yes, the ocean should not be this warm at this time of the year. And that obviously has very, very specific and easy effect. The scientists can also help us with that, right? So I think it's up to us, it's our responsibility to really make those connections for people so that they understand that this is not just, it's a natural disaster that just happens every day. Clearly that's not the case anymore, and we can't say that it is. So one way we're actually thinking about it too, in terms of the cultural shift, is we just actually did an interesting meeting with representatives of Hollywood about how to incorporate better climate storytelling in TV and film. We've seen this in the past work really well with, for example, the Designated Driver campaign, with Will and Grace, of course, with gay marriage. So I think this is something that everybody's thinking about, and believe me, they are as well. But of course, it just has to be entertaining, and it has to ultimately bring joy to people. So it can't just be, there is a space for all of the doom and gloom kind of post-apocalyptic movies about climate change, but there must be space for those ones where it's just characters talking about climate change as a part of your life, which it is nowadays for all of us, across all parts of our lives. So I wanted to just share that.
No, that's a brilliant initiative, Hank, wanted to touch base, and before that, if anyone has any question, we can open up. Yes, we have a few. Panas, I don't know if there's a microphone back there, or if, feel free
Unfortunately
to.
not, but you can stand up and use your both words.
Oh, sure. Hello, my name is Justin Vargas. I work for the Gateway Development Commission. I'm not a journalist, but I'm going to ask this question as just a normal citizen. So as you mentioned, as many of the panelists mentioned, first of all, incredible job on everything that you're doing with technology, with the states. The question is, climate change has an image problem. It's an image issue. So when you Google climate change, all the images that comes across are negative images. And you talk about education at a grassroots level. So if companies are making changes, great. Projects are making changes, great. What about the ultimate 8 billion people? Because ultimately, we have to change our behavior with respect to food waste, the clothes we wear, everything, right? So I feel like sometimes when we have this discussion, we tend to be only talking about energy, but there's also a big topic like climate justice, environmental justice, water, the food waste, and everything is linked to climate change. So how do you address that? Like how does the information from top, you have top, information buying from parliamentarians, states, countries, but what about the common people who are going to be affected the most?
I'll start just to jump in. So the school curriculum is a place to start. And a few years ago, the Italian government had an initiative around this. And I think there's 60 countries now who have signed up out of the 193 UN member countries. But for example, at Arizona State University, every student graduates with a sustainability competency. And this was pretty radical 20 years ago when Michael Crow, the president, and Julie Wrigley introduced it. But now we have a whole set of university climate partnerships, and we're designing curriculum for K through 12, for secondary schools, as well as for universities. So that is certainly one lever that I see as important, and we have been talking to the Global Director of Education at the World Bank about that. One last thing too is that Open Planet, everybody knows the David Attenborough films. So there's a new set of tools that are freely available to everybody, images on openplanet.org, just launched a couple of months ago, so have a look. And I'm going to be talking to Marina about her brilliant idea and how we can start doing some competitions around that. It's a free resource for everybody. How do we really create awareness so that we do correct the doom and gloom, as you say, and think about the positive scenarios?
Yes, I don't know. Go ahead.
Maybe just to add, I think of climate change not from the doom and gloom. Of course, that is a scenario that we are going to avoid. I look at it as the biggest economic opportunity of my life, because this truly is an opportunity. We can transform our ways of living in so many ways, and by doing it the right way, we create exciting jobs, we create new revenue streams for different regions around the world. So we can also choose to think of it from that respect and act on it from that respect.
Absolutely, but the reason I ask is also because the media, the journalists, people in this room, I think we also have a moral obligation. When we share the story online, we usually try to do it in the negative tone first, right? So if we have a positive angle of the women who you have empowered through the projects, that would actually give people hope. Yes, I can do this. I have tiny projects here and there. I don't get funding from around the world, but those projects sometimes bring in personal joy. Like people say, oh, that's amazing to see this. And I think that's probably what, as humanity, we may need to hold on to. Otherwise, you have, it's like you mentioned, the binary conversation. There's a documentary called Social Dilemma. Depending on where you Google a particular subject, the information you are being fed is completely different. So I may be sitting here thinking climate change is fake, and I'm thinking, which newspaper are you reading? And to me, that is truth. Because I saw in newspapers, I saw in some local magazines, so I'm thinking I am right and you're wrong. So I think as journalists, we all have, even though I'm not a journalist, we are communicators. We owe that to people around us to disseminate truth in a way which can be digestible.
No, totally agree. I think you said it all, and it's already been said, and I've also used a couple of examples of how we're thinking about all of this, but one other thing that I think we need to do better as well is to imagine what that utopia looks like, because it's so much easier to go for the dystopia. We know what the dystopia looks like. It's some kind of a cold nuclear war, whatever. We've seen it all right in the movies, so I don't have to tell you. But I don't think that we know exactly what that utopia looks like. What is that beautiful green lush planet that we want to go back to and we want our future generations to inhabit? this just reminded me, actually, total non-sequitur. My 6-year-old daughter was trying to explain to my 3-year-old daughter what age is and what it means to grow older. And she said, well, today, now is the youngest you'll ever be. And I was like, wow, that's like kind of a great way and also kind of profound way to explain age and how, whether you're growing older, especially through a 3-year-old. And then I was thinking, I mean, it is like now and today is the day when we have to do this, right? There is no going back. We have to live in the present, but we have to look to the future and really to leave our planet and our humanity for those future generations, for my children, for all of your children, for all of the children in our lives, right? Because, we don't have a lot of time. So we have to be impatient in some ways. We have to be patient because these things are thorny and take a long time, and they're hard because they go across sectors, across geographies, across generations. So they're hard. So in some ways we need to have a healthy dose of patience. But I think we really need to have a healthy dose of impatience as well, because there is a lot of urgency here that we all just need to grasp.
Thank you. Great question. Yeah, come back. Have a few in the room. Just before that, just wanted George to chime in since we're talking a lot about communication and journalists. Anything to add on that point, especially in how the news is shared to ensure that it's reaching audiences effectively?
Yeah, I'll just reinforce a couple of things. I think everyone in this room lives this. I think the media environment is so fragmented at the moment, and people get caught in affirmation loops, hearing what they want to hear and getting more of what they want to be told, and you can live in alternate realities as you've described. I just reinforce the point. One is you cannot have an elite discussion where you're forcing it down people's throats, because I think that will meet resistance and will probably exacerbate the issue. I think that's the lesson of history over time, right? It's not even a PR thing. That's just history. I think that breaking the conversation, the either-or conversations, doing things where, as you say, imagine the utopia you want. It's a no compromises future, right? When you're engaging with people around this discussion, I think it's really important to be aware of all the pressures they're under on a day-to-day basis. And it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yes, I mean, climate should be number one for everyone, but for a lot of people it's not. It's food that day, or it's shelter, or it's whatever it might be. So I think being really mindful of that and coming from a position of privilege and how you engage in that discussion is super important. And then I think finally it's what Eda was saying, that this is actually an opportunity. I think we so often frame this discussion in the negative, where it's actually an opportunity to drive new economic growth, new jobs, new development, and I think there's a
Clean air.
But there's an element when I used to work in politics around message discipline, right? Like we need to train the way we speak ourselves to not get caught in that style of debate, but to talk about opportunity.
Two more points I want to say, sorry. One thing is that there is something called solution journalism. Many of you might be already doing that, but it is a new growing kind of field of journalism. We have a partner called Solutions Journalism Network that's doing really great work on this, so if you're interested, please let me know and I can connect you to them. The second thing is, and climate is a big priority for them, but otherwise as well. The second thing I wanted to say, because George, you just reminded me, for example, when we were talking to the representatives of Hollywood, and actually we're doing that as well with Nollywood and Bollywood and some of the other big markets in the Global South. One way, for example, that it's actually been quite effective is by placing electric vehicles in films. So it's not necessarily, like a big, here's like, huge like preaching, like, climate change, blah, blah. It's just like a cool guy going into an electric vehicle. But that is the kind of messaging, to your point, that we also need.
I was so upset that we didn't win an Academy Award for Barbie because it had Chevy products all through it. And we should have been acknowledged by the Academy.
Yeah. Lots of questions. We'll try and get as many as possible. I think we're running out of time, but we'll take your question. Please go ahead. Shoot your hand earlier. Yes?
Thank you. My name is Momoe Ban. I'm with Nikkei newspaper, a Japanese business newspaper. And since I cover financial market for a long time, I'd like to ask about ESG-related issues and capital market. And in the United States, there's a divide in terms of view of ESG. especially some states like Texas. And in fact, today, Governor of Texas announced to create Texas Stock Exchange, which welcomes companies which is not subject to ESG, like New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. And the large financial institutions like BlackRock or Citadel support this creation of the new Texas Stock Exchange. And I was wondering, as an organization which is, supporting and promoting this ESG issues, how do you deal with this kind of movement in the United States, especially like Texas, where teachers' pension funds are against investing in they are trying to invest in ExxonMobil because they can get more return on the pension funds. So there is this kind of movement. So how do you deal with this kind of situation?
Two people comment on that, and then we'll move on since we have a few more questions.
That's a really difficult one, and it shows the power of legislation. So we know in both Florida and in Texas, it is not allowed now by legislation for pension funds, state pension funds, to invest in companies with ESG ratings, which of course is just an implicit subsidy to the fossil fuel industry. So the difficulty is as a taxpayer, it's a small amount of our taxes, and for the vested interests who don't want to lose these massive subsidies and would otherwise not have economic businesses, it's really, a vexed question. When you think about the fact that renewables are now, 2 cents a kilowatt hour, oil and gas is 8, and then you've got all the negative externalities to cope with as well, it's a very tricky issue. And I'm not an American, so I'm looking at this obviously from an outsider's perspective, but as a mother, it makes no sense to me that we would be, in fact, continuing to legislate and subsidize the demise of our planet. It just seems crazy. So, anyone else brave enough to speak about that?
We don't, I don't know.
Yes.
Let's go to the other question.
We'll take another. We'll take another question.
I'm sorry, can I add something?
Yeah, sure. Very briefly, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Nico Samlonison from Pleasure Sustainability for the last couple of years. So what you said, and it was part of the discussion later on today, already 50% of investments globally is going to be sustainable by 2025. That's official. The term ESG is very important, and we have seen the same thing in 2016 elections. The term climate change in 1 year became very negative, and all the companies started to use the term carbon footprint instead. And then 3 years after, it returned back as climate crisis, and everybody was using the term climate crisis instead of climate change anymore. These things are come and go. The thing is that investors, which are the big decision makers, have been already decided that no matter if we're going to use the term ESG or sustainability, this is going to happen. This is the only way moving forward, and there are facts and evidence so that no matter what is going to happen in Florida or in Texas, let's move on.
Texas actually has massive renewables on the grid too, which is really interesting.
We'll take one question here. Please go ahead.
Thank you. These are two possibly irrelevant questions. But first is my concern about silos. That all of these incredibly important questions are being dealt with without the recognition that other incredibly important and life-threatening questions are related. Now, I have an elder brother who worked for the Atomic Energy Commission, Los Alamos, New Mexico. He knows too much. He was offered a full PhD at Stanford in psychology, which he took to get away from what he knew was going on in Los Alamos. He is now desperately concerned that while we may have 5 years left, I was surprised you mentioned the year 2045, because I think that's optimistic. We may have 5 years more for climate to reverse what hopefully is reversible. But if any kind of nuclear war breaks out, and it appears as though they are playing around with this, we have 75 minutes before we're all exterminated. Now, the radioactivity that was emitted in the 1950s in Los Alamos has caused the deaths by radiation sickness, vast numbers of people, and of course the indigenous people who were invited to mine the uranium on the lands they were given because they were deemed useless until they found the uranium. I personally am more frightened of radioactivity in the environment, of cancers that are really metastasizing. Now, you're dealing with something that also terrifies me because waking up every morning to drenching rainfalls, which I don't remember in my childhood, is horribly depressing. I checked the rain before I came here. So, to deal with these things separately, whereas you have a common terror, seems to me to weaken your ability to engage masses of people, which is what you need. I am very grateful to the two ladies on the panel for speaking about economic empowerment of women, because that is the only thing that will bring about and this would have to be written into law. I had an education because I had a mother who was a teacher and who kept her own income separate from her husband. He loved me, but she would have killed to give me an education, which I got. So the idea that there are teachers' pension funds which are invested into horrific, I would say, dangerous, because this will enable teachers to have a better income upon retirement. I will quote.
So sorry to jump in, it's just that we really
I know.
run out of time.
I'll
So
come to
if
the.
we get the question.
I'll come to the conclusion. Yes. I drank too much of this one. The late Evelyn Lauder, in a Power Couples discussion at the 92nd Street line, said in the United States we pay $30 million to a basketball player. We pay only $30,000 to a teacher per year. There has to be a change in priorities, where teachers are given enough respect to get a substantial pension that does not have to be invested in a fossil fuels producing industry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
So
Thank
if
you.
you can do something, now I know in my Mother's Day they tied themselves to.
Really need to get to the question.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. We just we
Wait,
have less
what's
than
the
5 minutes
question?
to wrap up.
We have
Why
the question
don't
from
you-
our.
One. We just have to
Let's
take
take
one.
that offline and we can chat afterwards, and so that other people get a chance as
All
well.
right. All right. We'll go. Please go ahead.
And then to Steph.
Hi everyone, I'm Alan Herrera. I run editorial operations for the association, so I'll represent us. First and foremost, thank you of course to all of you. Marina, I started my career in film criticism, so I would have so much to say on that, so much to say.
I'm so scared.
Yes, no, I think it's fascinating, it's a great initiative. So, the thing that comes to mind here, and I wanted to, I feel that the gentleman who spoke a little earlier also touched on this a little bit. But we're, of course, talking about policy. And the tech companies have been remarkably irresponsible, especially when we get to the topic of algorithmic bias. So the internet that I look at, as somebody who cares about climate and all that, or what Amanda looks at, or what anybody here looks at, they're looking at something entirely different. I have friends who are brilliant people, but who have been sucked down a well of misinformation. And I get sent text messages about how, electric vehicles are evil and all this other nonsense, right? So how do we even begin to, of course we're talking about the science and all these other things, but the tech companies do need to step up. We need to have a conversation about how to make them, even force them to be responsible. So how do we do this? How do we partner with these tech companies? How do we make them see, the urgency of everything that we're talking about? And how do we transfer this down to the common person?
Just one person comment, and then if we have space, anyone else wants to jump in?
Yeah. We did a lot of research in tech companies in Silicon Valley, and they are behind about 10 years. According to every other sector in sustainability, food, oil, chemical, they're completely behind the curve of what's happening. They get no pressure of doing something because everybody believes that data centers, which are one of the most energy consuming, things in the world today, they don't understand that, they don't get that, and therefore the people does not put pressure to them or the investors, and therefore they don't think they have to do something about that. So no pressure means no activity on behalf of the tech companies on sustainability, and we still are behind 5 to 6 years based on the average companies that there are in the unfortunately.
I think there's also, there are ways to work with influencers who are on these platforms. And actually, the tech companies have even come to us and said, hey, we would like some of these influencers with millions of followers to get the messages that you get out there. Because they don't see themselves as the sort of, that they should be the messengers. But they're willing, to a certain extent, to help us get to them, right? So I think there are ways we can try to work around whatever firewalls they have and they will put up. So that's something that actually we were trying to explore. How do we kind of make them champions of climate action? Because many of these influencers are actually very, very passionate about it. They just don't really know how to speak to it, to their audiences. So it's kind of figuring out what their audiences are, what they want to see, what they want to hear, and then help them sort of get those messages infused. So I think there's ways to do it, but I mean, I agree with you that ultimately it is, it's biased, and there's a lot of bias, there's a lot of misinformation out there that we need to start addressing.
Hank wanted to jump in, I think.
Just quickly, so the question is, what is true? And if you go back in time, we relied on news to be true, and now we can no longer rely on news to be true. Then governments rely on their secret agencies like the CIA to find out what's true, and then even they got it wrong. They, weapons of mass destruction and all that. I think a good use of AI would be to have AI figure out what is true and what's not true, and label everything, label everything, on a level of 0 to 100 as how true is this. And humans just can't keep up. I just read Noah's book, Yuval's book, Nexus, and it's all about truth is expensive and information is cheap. And so we can't fight information with information because there's too much of it. But creating a value on truth, I think, would be an interesting thing, and we could, you can force the big, the Silicon Valley people to actually do something about finding out what is actually true. Because if we all lose touch with what is true, we lose our democracy. And democracy really depends on people knowing what truth is, and that's a real danger that we're facing.
Great. We'll take one question. Let's keep it. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Casella. I work right now in the policy communications world. Previously, my last role was with the American American Association of Port Authorities, and I was on their government relations and communication, the communicator for their government relations team. So one of the proudest moments of my work with them was during the Inflation Reduction Act. We were able to pass $6 billion for the first ever electrification program for ports around the United States. But the issue was that not all ports wanted to partake in this program. So just like you see cultural differences with regions across the United States, so are the ports. So you would have port leaders and CEOs in the Pacific Northwest who are like very much for electrifying their ports, and then ports in like Corpus Christi, Texas, who had no interest in electrification whatsoever. So I guess all of these questions are sort of on a macro level, asking the same thing that I want to ask on a micro level, but I think, Hank, you might have touched on this before. When we talk about electrifying, electric power and things like that, there are so many points of misinformation and disinformation about like how, oh, this is dirtier than fuel. This is just going to be worse than fossil fuels. Like, it looks so bad. Look at these kits where they have like, how do we specifically to people who don't want to hear what we have to say about how important other sources of energy are, how do we actually combat that with like a couple of like really quick talking points that shut them down right away? Great question.
Well, actually, we support the Associated Press and NPR, and Associated Press is kind of obviously very global outlet, and so we were some of the first funders of their climate desk. And to somebody's point, about climate change not being really a priority for a lot of policymakers and media organizations, I really do think that in the last couple of years we finally are seeing a little bit more of a proliferation of real good reporting on climate change. It's still not enough, and we're still seeing a lot of need for a lot more coordination and more training as well, especially in the developing world. But we are seeing progress there. And I will say, one thing that our partners at NPR told us is that one thing that was one of the most sort of successful stories, most read, was actually one of those kinds of like Q&As, FAQs that they did. And I think it was about, I'm gonna mess it up, but it was about like an appliance issue or something like that. And it was like, oh yeah, it was the same sort of idea, like, oh, this is actually worse for the environment if you do this, and then they just did this kind of like myth-busting FAQ, and it ended up being the most popular climate story that their climate desk did. And so I think there are ways to sort of diffuse information so that it's intelligible and it's fast and it's quick and you get it right away. Because I think, we can get lost in the really, really sort of high science of it, and it really turns off people. And so I think it's really kind of finding ways to really get that through. But it also speaks, all of these questions honestly speak to a larger issue of polarization in this country, but also in the world. And unfortunately, climate change has somehow become one of the sort of main issues here, which should not be the thing that we should be polarized about at all, because it's about our planet and about our people on this planet, and that's the one thing that unites us all, right? So it's kind of a funny thing that they somehow made even that into a political issue, but it is, it's a larger problem, with our democracies in general.
Yeah, have time for one last question.
Thank
1
you.
minute, so that's 30 seconds the question and 30 seconds response.
My name is
Let's see how
Maqsuda Aziz. I'm a student at NYU, journalism student, though I don't work with like news writing, more with the audience engagement. So I had a very weird experience doing this climate story in Howard Beach area. I found like people there has a certain belief in a certain political party who don't trust in climate change. And I believe this is not only them. There are like countries who have like bigger problem like wars and like poverty and many other things. So, well, what is your plan or how you see engaging them in like trusting climate change and like changing their behavior in like adopting this type of technology you are trying to advocate? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm dealing a lot with islands, and islands, for example, Tuvalu, they say, if you want to talk to us about climate change, you have to talk fast because we're not going to be around in 30 years. You know, that kind of thing. And so they're dealing with sea level rise, which in their opinion is more pressing than climate change. But then, you know, a lot of these islands, and this is everywhere pretty much, they import diesel to make electricity. And diesel is probably the most expensive way that you could possibly make electricity. So even though, you know, they have poverty problems or they have whatever the problem is, by switching to renewable energy, that is going to save them money, and it's a big economic boom. And if I was a country and I had a choice between having an infrastructure of solar farms all over the place and wind farms, or a couple of oil refineries, if I was somebody's going to start a war, guess what's going to go away first?
Yeah.
It's my oil refinery. There's single points of failure. So I mean, for security issue, for economic reasons, all of these reasons, distributed renewable energy is the answer.
Just one quick last point, for me anyway. I think to your point as well, I think there are, and I agree, climate change is a cross-cutting issue right now that really does touch on so many parts of our lives and of the economy and of our political systems as well, right? So, for example, you know, the primary UN body, IOM, on migration, just this year released data that climate change is actually the primary cause of migration in the world. So, you know, this is not really, it's not things that you necessarily think right away, but that is the case. And obviously that leads to conflict or exacerbates already civil unrest, and especially in areas of the world that already have a lot of ethnic strife. And so I think this is something that is very much a part of it. It's just that we don't necessarily talk about it that way. And so again, it's up to us, kind of the communicators here and the advocates and the activists, to make those connections.
Thank you. We've run out of time. I know there are some more questions. We'll take them up afterwards. But before we wrap up, I'd like each and everyone here on the panel just to give us a quick message. What do you want people to take? I mean, what do you want the audience to take away from this discussion in less than 1 minute? We'll start with Edda.
I think it comes back to determination and collaboration, because nobody will do it by themselves. No country would do it by themselves. It has to be collaboration in sort of the biggest interpretation of that word.
I think from two things on my side. One is, I think we're focused a lot on things that aren't working, but I think this is actually generally an era of opportunity, of new technology, unlocking new ways of mutually beneficial outcomes for both the environment, the economy, for families, etc. So I take a much more optimistic view of that personally, and the second one is, if you're in the market for an EV, get one from GM.
I just want everybody in the world to understand that we're doing this. This is not a, you know, like maybe we'll do it. This is absolutely something, because first of all, we're going to run out of fossil fuel. It's not a limitless supply. And it's going to get more and more expensive to get it out of these more difficult places. And at the same time, renewable energy is becoming cheaper and cheaper. So I really don't care if you want to change your ways because of climate change. Just change your ways. I don't care what your reason is. And so you know, I don't need people to focus so much on climate change, and then have that debate. No. Buy an electric car because it's only got 24 parts instead of 2,400. You know, and it's going to give you more acceleration if that's the thing that you want. So, do your smart.
Partnerships are paramount for multiplier impact.
So pithy. Now I gotta come up with something.
No pressure.
Alliteration, only one line. No, I don't have it. But I'll just say, I think all of us here are bridges, and so just think of ourselves as ways to kind of bridge these different contrasting views and opinions, and find ways to actually work together. I mean, I know it's a very kind of cliche thing to say, but I go back though to an old saying from where I'm from, which is that bridges are really nice until somebody steps on you. Somebody steps on the bridges. But I think sometimes they can be hard, you know, in your example. But I think, but that's also what made the ones that agreed to do to electrify and have a, you know, renewable electrification that much more sweet and
20
that
years
much
ago
more
they weren't
successful.
doing it, so.
Yes,
20
exactly.
years ago they weren't talking about it, 10 years ago they weren't doing it.
Yeah,
now they're
exactly.
doing it,
So there is progress. There is, and really there is. I mean, just thinking about, to your point, the last 5-10 years, how much has already been done, and the fact that we are in this room talking about this. I don't think we would have been here 5-10 years ago. So it's a big deal. So we just need to kind of keep the momentum going and really look for the solutionists in the room. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's give a big round of applause. Thank you all so much. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. There are lots of great insights, and we'll continue. There's a lot more to chat about. Thank you once again for joining us today. Thank you.